The rough rope dug into their small wrists. 5 boys stood in a ragged line outside the county clerk's office in Bitter Creek, their faces streaked with dust and dried tears. The youngest couldn't have been more than 4 years old. His bare feet were covered in blisters, and a shirt 2 sizes too big hung loose off one shoulder. He clutched the hand of the boy standing next to him, maybe 7 years old, who stared straight ahead with that hollow, empty expression of someone who had already learned not to hope for anything. The other 3 were older, 9, 11, and 13 perhaps, all of them thin, all of them silent in a way that felt deeply wrong, like birds that had forgotten they ever knew how to sing. A small crowd had gathered in the late afternoon heat, their faces curious but unmoved. This wasn't the first time Bitter Creek had watched orphaned children parceled out like livestock at a market, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The county clerk, a narrow, pinched man named Howell with ink-stained fingers and a voice like gravel-scraping stone, stood on the porch steps with a ledger in hand. He cleared his throat and spoke with the flatness of someone reading a grocery list. Parents died of fever 3 weeks back. No kin came forward, no money left behind. The county can't go on feeding 5 mouths indefinitely. He glanced down the line of boys with the same detached look a man might give a row of vegetables gone bad. We're splitting them up. Families willing to take 1, maybe 2 if you've got the room. Step forward now. The oldest boy, 13 or thereabouts, took a half step in front of his brothers. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. His hand rested gently, protectively, on the shoulder of the boy beside him. A farmer named Hewitt moved forward first, hat turning slowly in his hands. "I'll take the oldest," he said. "He's strong enough to work. I'll feed him fair." Howell nodded and scratched a note in his ledger. "Wait." The oldest boy's voice cracked as he turned toward Hewitt, eyes wide with something close to panic. "We stay together. All 5 of us." Howell didn't even bother looking up. "That's not how this works, son. We are brothers." The boy's voice climbed higher now, desperate and trembling. "You can't." "We are 5 brothers," the second oldest said quietly, his own voice shaking. "Nobody keeps more than 2. Howell's pen paused for just a moment. Something that might have been pity flickered across his face. And then it was gone. That's the way of it. Be grateful someone's willing to take you at all. A woman in a faded blue dress stepped forward next, her tone clipped and matter-of-fact. "I'll take the little one. I need help around the house, and he's young enough to be trained up proper." The youngest boy whimpered and pressed himself hard against his brother's leg. "No," the oldest boy's voice broke open. "Please don't take him. Don't take any of them. We'll work. We'll do anything. Just don't split us up." The crowd shifted on its feet, uneasy, but no one spoke up. Howell sighed, his patience worn thin. "Boy, you don't have a say in this. The county decides. Now, step back." The oldest boy didn't move. His chest heaved. His fists clenched hard at his sides. He looked at his brothers, at their faces, their fear, their silent pleading, and something deep inside him shattered. "Please," he whispered. It wasn't really a word anymore. It was a surrender. From the back of the crowd, a man stood watching. Tall and lean, weathered by years of sun and wind, his hat pulled low to shadow his face. He wore a dusty brown coat, a faded red neckerchief, and boots that had walked 1,000 miles of hard country. His name was Caleb Ronn, and he had ridden into Bitter Creek just an hour ago with no intention of staying, just passing through. Nothing more. But now he stood there, watching 5 boys being torn from each other, and something in his chest tightened like a knot pulled too fast and too hard. He recognized that look on the oldest boy's face. He had worn it himself once. 23 years ago, Caleb had stood in a line just like this one. Not 5 boys, 3. Him and his 2 younger brothers, James and Samuel. Their parents had been taken by a winter fever, same as these boys' folks. The county had split them up without a second thought. Caleb had gone to a ranch outside Red Bluff. James had been sent away to a family in Kansas. Samuel, the youngest, had disappeared into a mining camp somewhere up north. Caleb had never seen either of them again. For 2 decades he had searched, sent letters, ridden thousands of miles, asked questions in every town, every camp, every forgotten corner of the frontier. But the West swallows people whole. James and Samuel were gone, erased by distance and time, and the cold indifference of a system that didn't care whether brothers ever remembered each other's faces. And now, here in Bitter Creek, it was happening all over again. Caleb's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The woman in the blue dress reached for the youngest boy's hand. "Come on now, child. It'll be all right." The boy screamed. It was a raw, animal sound, pure terror and desperation with nothing held back. He clung to his brother with both hands, sobbing, his small fingers digging into the older boy's shirt. No, don't take him, please." The oldest brother dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the little one, holding him as tight as he could. His own tears came then, hot and uncontrollable. "I won't let them," he choked out. "I won't." Howell stepped forward, his voice sharp as a blade. Someone pull them apart. 2 men from the crowd moved toward the boys. And that's when Caleb Ronn stepped forward. His boots hit the dirt with a slow, deliberate heaviness. The crowd parted around him. Howell looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "Something I can help you with, mister?" Caleb stopped a few feet from the porch steps. He looked at the 5 boys, at their tear-streaked faces, their trembling hands, their desperate clinging hope. Then he looked at Howell. "I'll take them." The crowd went dead silent. Howell blinked. "Take who?" "All 5. Howell let out a short, incredulous laugh. "All 5? Do you have any idea what you're saying? That's 5 mouths to feed, 5 boys to clothe and house and raise." "I know what 5 is," Caleb said quietly. Howell studied him, eyes narrowing. "You got a ranch? A wife? Any real idea what you're signing yourself up for?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at the oldest boy, still kneeling in the dust, still holding his youngest brother like a lifeline. The boy stared back at him, scared, confused, but desperately, achingly hopeful. Caleb's voice was low and steady. "I know what it's like to lose your brothers." The oldest boy's breath hitched. Howell frowned. "That's real touching, mister, but sentiment doesn't raise children. You got the means?" "I've got land," Caleb said. "A ranch 20 miles south. It's not much, but it's mine. I've got a barn, a house, and enough work to keep 5 boys busy." "And when they're more trouble than they're worth?" Howell challenged. "When they fight, steal, run off? What then?" Caleb's gaze didn't waver. "Then they're still mine." The silence stretched out long and heavy. Finally, Howell snapped his ledger shut. "Fine. Sign here." He jabbed a finger at a line on the page. "But don't come crying to the county when you can't handle them." Caleb stepped up onto the porch. He took the pen Howell held out and signed his name in slow, careful strokes. Behind him, the 5 boys stared in disbelief. The oldest boy rose slowly from the dust, still gripping his youngest brother's hand. His voice came out barely above a whisper. You're taking all of us?" Caleb turned to face them. He crouched down so he was level with the youngest boy. "What's your name, son?" The boy sniffled, his voice tiny. "Toby." "Toby." Caleb repeated the name gently, then looked at each boy in turn. "And the rest of you?" "I'm Eli," the oldest said hoarsely. "That's Micah, Jonah, and Amos." He pointed to each brother as he said the names. Caleb nodded slowly. Eli, Micah, Jonah, Amos, Toby. He stood and tipped his hat just slightly. "My name is Caleb Ronn, and if you're willing, you're coming home with me. All 5 of you." Toby's face crumpled, and he began to cry again. But this time it wasn't fear pouring out of him. It was relief. Eli stared at Caleb, his eyes red and wet. "Why?" he whispered. Why would you do this? Caleb looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then he said simply, because nobody should have to let go. The ride south was quiet. Caleb had borrowed a wagon from the livery, and the 5 boys sat together in the back, pressed close like birds huddled in a nest. They didn't talk much. Now and then, one of them would lean over and whisper something to another, but mostly they just watched the horizon roll past in silence, their faces still tight with fear and disbelief. Caleb drove without speaking, the reins loose in his hands. His mind was somewhere else entirely. He kept seeing James and Samuel, kept hearing their voices from 2 decades ago, calling his name as strangers pulled them in different directions, kept feeling that crushing weight of helplessness, the same weight he had seen in Eli's eyes today. He had failed his brothers. He hadn't been old enough, strong enough, or loud enough to stop what happened. And for 23 years, that failure had followed him, like a shadow that never shortened, no matter how high the sun climbed. But maybe, just maybe, he could do for these boys what no one had ever done for him. The ranch came into view as the sun dipped low and red on the horizon. It wasn't much to look at. A small wooden house with a sagging porch, a barn that was overdue for new boards, a chicken coop, and a paddock holding 3 horses. The land spread out around it in dry golden waves, dotted with scrub brush and rock. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. Here we are. The boys didn't move at first. They stared at the house like it might disappear if they blinked too hard. Go on, Caleb said gently. It's yours now. Eli was the first to climb down. He helped Toby out. Then the others followed one by one. They stood in a loose, uncertain cluster near the wagon. Caleb gestured toward the house. There are 2 rooms inside. You'll share one. I'll take the other. The barn's got tools. Animals need feeding morning and night. There's a creek a 1/4 mile east if you want to wash up. He paused. You hungry? Micah nodded quickly, his stomach answering out loud with a growl. Caleb almost smiled. All right, let's get you fed. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and old leather. It was spare. A table, a few chairs, a cast iron stove, shelves lined with tin cups and canned goods. Caleb got to work frying salt pork and boiling beans while the boys sat stiffly at the table, still too unsettled to speak. When the food was set down in front of them, he said simply, Eat. They ate like they hadn't seen a proper meal in days. Toby stuffed beans into his mouth with both hands. Amos chewed so fast he choked and had to be thumped on the back by Jonah. Eli ate more slowly, but his eyes never once left Caleb. When the plates were cleared, Caleb poured water into cups and sat down across from them all. I'm not going to lie to you, he said quietly. This isn't going to be easy. Ranch work is hard. You'll be up before dawn, and some days you'll be so tired you'll want to quit. But you'll have a roof over your heads, food in your bellies, and each other. He paused. And I won't split you up. Not ever. Eli's throat worked. Why? He asked again, his voice raw. Why did you take us? You don't know us. We could be trouble. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a small chest in the corner of the room, and pulled something out. Something wrapped carefully in a square of cloth. He brought it back to the table and set it down gently, then unwrapped it. It was a photograph. Old, faded, creased at the edges. It showed 3 boys standing in front of a wooden fence. The oldest, maybe 12, had his arms wrapped around the 2 younger ones, and all 3 were smiling. Caleb's voice dropped low. That's me on the left. He pointed. That's James. That's Samuel. The boys leaned in close, staring at the image. What happened to them? Jonah asked softly. Caleb's jaw tightened. We lost our parents when I was 13. Same as you. Fever took them both inside of a week. He paused, his voice thickening. The county split us up. I went to a ranch. James went to Kansas. Samuel went north. He looked down at the photograph. I never saw them again. The silence in the room was suffocating. I searched, Caleb continued, his voice barely above a whisper. For years, sent letters, rode out to every town, every camp, asked anyone who would listen. He exhaled slowly. But the West swallows people. And after a while, you stop hearing back. You stop finding traces. And you start to wonder. Maybe they're gone. Maybe they forgot you. Or maybe they're out there somewhere, wondering the very same thing. Eli stared at him, eyes wide and wet. You never found them? Caleb shook his head. No, I'm sorry, Eli whispered. Caleb looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same desperate, fierce love he had carried for James and Samuel all these years. The same willingness to fight, to beg, to break himself apart if it meant keeping his brothers safe. I took you, Caleb said quietly, because I know what it's like to stand where you stood today. And I know what it's like to lose. His voice cracked, and I couldn't watch it happen again. Eli's face crumpled, tears rolled freely down his cheeks. Thank you, he choked out. Thank you. Toby slid off his chair, padded over to Caleb, and wrapped his small arms around the man's leg, pressing his face into his knee. Caleb closed his eyes. His hand came down slowly, gently, on the boy's head. You're safe now, he said. All of you. The next morning, Caleb woke them before dawn. He showed them how to feed the horses, muck the stalls, gather eggs, and haul water up from the creek. The work was hard, and by midday, every one of them was sweating and exhausted, but not a single boy complained. At supper, Eli spoke up. Mr. Ronn. Caleb, he corrected gently. Caleb. Eli tried it again, then asked, What do we call you? Are you our pa now? Micah leaned forward, the same hesitation in his face. Caleb set his fork down slowly. He looked at each of them in turn, their hopeful, scared, uncertain faces, and felt something shift in his chest like a door swinging open. I'm not your pa, he said carefully. I can't replace him. But I'll take care of you, and I'll be here for as long as you need me. Eli nodded slowly. That's enough. 3 weeks passed. The boys settled into the rhythm of ranch life. They rose with the sun, worked through the heat of the day, and fell asleep each night exhausted, but together. Slowly, the fear began to drain from their eyes. Toby laughed again. Amos taught Jonah how to skip stones at the creek. Eli stopped flinching every time Caleb raised his voice. It was fragile, but it was something real. Then one afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon. Caleb saw him first. He was mending a fence post near the paddock when the dust cloud rose in the distance. He straightened up, shading his eyes against the sun. The rider came on slowly, deliberately, a big man on a big horse. When he was close enough to make out clearly, Caleb recognized him, and his gut tightened like a fist. It was Howell, the county clerk from Bitter Creek. Howell reined his horse to a stop a few feet from the fence and looked down at Caleb with a thin, unpleasant smile. Ronn, Howell. Caleb kept his voice level. What brings you out this way? Just checking in. Howell dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post. He glanced around the ranch, at the boys working near the barn, at the modest house, at the hard and unforgiving land surrounding it all. Wanted to see how those boys are getting on. They're fine. That's so. Howell's smile didn't reach his eyes. Because I've been hearing things. Caleb's jaw tightened. What things? Talk around town. People saying you're working them too hard, that they're too thin, that maybe you bit off more than you could chew. Howell crossed his arms. Some folks think the county made a mistake letting you take all 5. The boys are healthy, Caleb said evenly. They're fed, they're clothed, they're together. Maybe. Howell's eyes narrowed. But the county still has a responsibility. If I see signs of neglect, or if someone files a complaint, I'm authorized to remove them. Caleb's blood ran cold. You can't do that. I can, Howell said, and I will. The law is on my side, Ronn. You signed papers, but those papers don't mean a thing if I say you're unfit. He leaned in slightly. So here's how this is going to work. I'll be coming by every few weeks. I'll inspect this place. And if I don't like what I find, well, we'll start finding new homes for those boys. Separately. Caleb's fists clenched. Why are you doing this? Howell smiled, cold and unhurried. Because I don't like being made a fool of. You waltzed in, played the hero, made me look like the villain in front of half the town. I don't forget that. He straightened and tipped his hat with a mocking little flourish. I'll be seeing you, Ronn. He mounted up and rode off without another word. Caleb stood there, his chest tight with rage and a fear he hadn't felt in years. He knew Howell's type well, small men with small amounts of power who wielded it like a club. And he knew Howell would follow through. The boys were in danger now, not from hunger or sickness, but from the law itself. That night, Caleb gathered the boys around the table. They sat looking at him, their faces already anxious before he'd said a word. What's wrong? Eli asked quietly. Caleb told them everything. He didn't soften it or dress it up. He explained what Howell had said, what the man had the authority to do, and what it meant for all of them. When he finished, the room was silent. Toby's eyes filled with tears. Are we going to be split up again? No, Caleb said firmly. I won't let that happen. But you said the law's on his side, Micah said, his voice shaking. What can you do? Caleb exhaled slowly. I'll figure something out. Eli stared at him. What if you can't? Caleb met his gaze without flinching. Then I'll fight. The weeks that followed were tense and watchful. Howell returned twice, poking around the ranch each time, inspecting the boys, scribbling notes in his ledger. He never found anything, because there was nothing to find. The boys were healthy, fed, and cared for. But Howell wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for an excuse. And then one afternoon, he found what he thought he needed. Jonah had been sick for 2 days. Nothing serious, just a fever that came and went like summer weather. Caleb had kept him in bed, given him water and broth, and the boy was already turning the corner. But when Howell arrived unannounced and saw Jonah lying pale against the pillow, something lit up behind his eyes. Sick, is he? Howell said, filling the doorway. How long? 2 days, Caleb said. He's getting better. Doesn't look better to me. Howell made a note. Looks like neglect. It's a fever, Caleb said, his voice going hard. Kids get fevers. Or maybe, Howell said slowly, savoring each word, you're not feeding them right, not caring for them the way you should. He looked up at Caleb with cold satisfaction. I'm filing a report. I'll be back in a week with a deputy. And if that boy isn't fully recovered, or if I find any other signs of neglect, I'm taking them. All 5. Caleb took a step forward, his voice dropping low and dangerous. You do that, and I'll make sure every person in Bitter Creek knows exactly what kind of man you are. Howell smiled. Go ahead. Who do you think they'll believe? A county official, or a drifter who showed up out of nowhere? He tipped his hat. 1 week, Ronn. He left. Caleb stood there shaking, with anger, with helplessness, with the awful familiar feeling of watching something precious slip through his hands. Eli appeared in the doorway, his face pale. He's going to take us, isn't he? Caleb looked at him. Not if I can help it. That night, Caleb sat on the porch long after the boys had gone to bed. The stars burned bright overhead. The air had turned cool, and the weight on his chest felt like it might press him right into the ground. He had spent 23 years haunted by the loss of his brothers, and now he was on the edge of losing 5 more. The door creaked behind him. Eli stepped out onto the porch, barefoot and quiet, and sat down beside Caleb without saying a word. They stayed like that for a long time. Finally, Eli spoke. You're thinking about running, aren't you? Caleb glanced at him, surprised. Eli gave a small, sad smile. I've thought about it too. Taking Toby and just running, leaving the others somewhere they'd be safe. His voice cracked. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't choose. Caleb exhaled slowly. I'm not running. Then what are you going to do? I don't know yet. Eli looked down at his hands. I don't want to lose them, he whispered. And I don't want to lose you either. Caleb's throat tightened. You saved us, Eli said, his voice thick with feeling. Not just from being split up. You saved us from forgetting what it feels like to be wanted. Tears slipped down his cheeks. And I don't know how to thank you for that. Caleb reached over and gripped the boy's shoulder. You don't have to thank me. But I do. Eli looked at him, eyes red. Because you didn't have to do any of this. You could have walked away. But you didn't. His voice broke. You stayed. Caleb pulled him into a hug. Eli collapsed against him and cried quietly into his shoulder. I'm not going anywhere, Caleb said, his voice rough. I promise. The next morning, Caleb rode into Bitter Creek. He didn't go anywhere near Howell's office. Instead, he went to the church. Reverend Pritchard was an old man with kind eyes and a voice that could fill any room he stood in. He had been the one who buried Caleb's parents all those years ago, though Caleb doubted the man still remembered. He found him in the chapel, arranging hymnals on the pews. Pritchard looked up and offered a warm smile. Can I help you, son? Caleb removed his hat. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Pritchard set the hymnals down. Go on. Caleb told him everything, about the boys, about Howell, about the threat hanging over all of them. When he finished, Pritchard sat quietly for a long moment. Then he sighed. Howell's always been a hard man, small-minded. He doesn't like being challenged. Can he really take the boys? Pritchard nodded slowly. Legally, yes. The county has the authority. He paused. But the law is only as strong as the people who enforce it, and Howell doesn't have nearly as much support as he thinks he does. What do you mean? People saw what you did, Pritchard said gently. They saw you step forward when no one else would. They saw those boys cling to you like you were the last solid thing in the world. And they remember what it feels like to lose family. He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. You are not alone in this. Caleb's chest tightened. What do I do? You stand your ground, Pritchard said, and you let the people of Bitter Creek stand with you. 1 week later, Howell returned. He arrived in a wagon with a deputy and 2 men from the county office, all of them wearing the grim, set faces of people who believed they had already won. They pulled up to the ranch just past noon. Caleb was waiting on the porch. Behind him, the 5 boys stood in a row, pale but defiant. Howell climbed down from the wagon, ledger under his arm. Ronn, I'm here to inspect the premises and assess the welfare of the children. Go ahead, Caleb said evenly. Howell walked past him into the house. The deputy followed. They spent 20 minutes going through every room, checking the beds, inspecting the food stores, searching for any foothold of an excuse. There was nothing. The house was clean. The boys were healthy. Jonah's fever had broken days ago. Howell emerged, his jaw set tight. Everything seems adequate. Then we're done here, Caleb said. Not quite. Howell's eyes narrowed. I've received complaints from concerned citizens who believe you are unfit to care for 5 children. He opened the ledger. Based on those complaints, I'm authorized to remove the boys pending a formal review. Caleb's blood turned cold. What complaints? From who? Howell smiled. That's confidential. That's a lie. The voice came from the edge of the property. Everyone turned. Reverend Pritchard stood there, Bible tucked under his arm. Behind him, a dozen people from Bitter Creek were walking forward. The farmer Whit, the woman in the blue dress, the blacksmith, the shopkeeper, families Caleb had never once spoken to. They moved in slowly, forming a loose half-circle around Howell's wagon. Howell's face darkened. This is county business. It doesn't concern any of you. It concerns all of us, Pritchard said quietly. Because what you're doing here isn't justice. It's cruelty. Hewitt stepped forward. I was there the day you tried to split those boys up. I was the one who was going to take the oldest one. His voice was rough with something that sounded like shame. I didn't think about what it would cost him. I didn't think about his brothers. He looked at Caleb. This man did. He gave them a home. And I'll be damned if I stand here and let you take that away. The woman in the blue dress spoke next, her voice quieter, but steady. I wanted the little one. I thought I was doing a kindness. She glanced at Toby, who stood pressed close to Eli's side. But I understand now. Kindness isn't taking. It's keeping them whole. One by one, the townspeople spoke. They told Howell they would not stand for it, that they had watched enough families be torn apart, that Caleb Ronn had done what the county should have done from the very start. Howell's face turned red. This is illegal interference. No, Pritchard said firmly. This is a community deciding what's right. The deputy shifted his weight uncomfortably. He glanced at Howell, then at the crowd gathered around them. Sir, maybe we should— Shut up, Howell snapped. He turned back to Caleb, his voice shaking now with barely contained rage. This isn't over. Yes, Caleb said quietly. It is. Howell stared at him for a long, burning moment. Then, with a curse under his breath, he climbed back into the wagon. The deputy and the other men followed without a word. They rode off into the dust, and the sound of the wheels faded until there was only silence and open air. The crowd stayed where they were. Caleb stood on the porch, his throat too tight to speak. Pritchard walked up and placed a hand on his shoulder. You did good, son. I didn't do it alone, Caleb managed. No, Pritchard agreed. You didn't. The days turned into weeks. Howell never came back. Word spread that the county had quietly dropped the complaint. Some people said Pritchard had spoken directly to the territorial governor. Others said the townspeople had put together a petition. Caleb didn't know the details, and honestly, he didn't much care. All that mattered was that the boys stayed. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. The boys grew stronger, more confident, more themselves. Toby stopped waking up in the night, crying from dreams. Amos and Jonah started joking around again. Micah learned to ride a horse. Eli smiled more. One evening, as the sun sank slow and amber over the dry land, Caleb stood near the fence post he'd been mending the day Howell first rode up to threaten everything. Eli walked over and stood beside him. You thinking about your brothers? Eli asked softly. Caleb nodded. Always. Do you think they'd be proud of you? Caleb looked at him. I hope so. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think they would be. Caleb's throat tightened. Why is that? Because you gave us what you never got, Eli said simply, a chance to stay together. Caleb closed his eyes. He felt the weight of 23 years lift. Just a little. Just enough. Thank you, he whispered. Eli smiled. No, thank you. Years later, people in Bitter Creek still talked about the day Caleb Ronn stood on his porch and refused to let 5 brothers be pulled apart. They talked about the townspeople who stood with him. They talked about how Howell rode off and never came back. But more than anything, they talked about the 5 boys who grew up on that ranch, who learned to work the land, to look after one another, to honor the man who had given them a home when the world had decided they didn't deserve one. And when those boys were grown, when they had families and lives and children of their own, they gathered every year at that same ranch, weathered and worn by then, but still standing, and they told their children the story of the cowboy who saw 5 brothers being torn apart and simply refused to let go. The sun dipped low over the ranch. Dust rose in the evening wind. Caleb stood on the porch and watched the boys play near the creek, their laughter carrying clear and bright across the open land. He thought of James. He thought of Samuel. And for the first time in 23 years, the ache in his chest felt just a little bit lighter. Because maybe, just maybe, he had finally found a way to bring his brothers home.